Welcome back to this third video in a series where I'm almost live learning some new technologies, and the first technology I'm working on is the Python programming language. It's been a few days since my last video, and I've been just thinking about the really simple program I wrote that is part of a program that will read some input data of some sort and then generate an XML file that I'm going to use as the default authentication file for a Guacamole web proxy server. So I'm just going to start a text editor and open up the Python program I was working on. And I'm also going to open up an example of the XML file that I want to output. This is an example, as I showed in one of the last videos. This is the goal, to create a file that sort of looks like this with 2 students and 4 devices per student. Now, as I was thinking about this, I realized sometime last night, that I actually am missing some information in the dictionary that I'm creating in Python. I am missing the student's username and password. I don't have that anywhere in this data structure over here. And I'm trying to think about how do I fit that in, because right now everything's got a key value pair in the dictionary. There's like the parameter hostname has 1 value associated with it. Port has 1 value. Up here, connection has 1 value. But then at the top level, I've got a username, student01, and password. I've got 2 key values all on 1 line. And I was wondering, how do I represent that in this dictionary? I came up with something that I'm just going to try to type in right now. So where I currently have a students directory, and that's made up of student01, which points to a set of devices, and student02, which points to a dictionary of devices. But I really need to define student 1 and student 2, and they need to include the username, the password, and the dictionary devices that is associated with that student. So what I'm going to do is, instead of having a dictionary of students, I'm going to create a list. So first things first, I'm going to delete the students dictionary here, and I'm going to create a list. And a list is created with the square brackets. There's 2 students in a list. And so this becomes the top level of my data structure. And then each student I'm going to define. And also, I was doing a bit more reading in that Python book, the Learning Python book. And I'm just going to do something a little bit different here to create the dictionary. The author says this is a clearer, perhaps more succinct way of creating a dictionary. And password equals, and the student password from that XML file. There it is. Oop. Instead of pointing to just some string, I'm going to point to the S1 device dictionary, like that. Well, that's an alternative way of creating a dictionary in Python. It's supposedly clearer when you're reading it. And that's one of the goals of Python, is to be clear when you're reading things. So this might be the better way to do it in the future. We'll just see how this works. I have a list of 2 students. Each student consists of a dictionary, a set of key value pairs. And each key value pair is a username, student1. So there's username, student1, password, and then the connection list, essentially. Devices is this structure here, which we already created before. So I've sort of just created a new high-level structure on top of this data structure. So let's see what that looks like. Let's bring up a terminal. Okay, so what I'm looking at here does not look like the data structure I'm supposed to be creating, because I'm expecting to see at the top level a list, not this dictionary. Let me see what's at the bottom here. Oh, well, that's because I need to change the loop. So I need to go for S in students. So now for S in students, I'm going through a list, not a dictionary. So instead of pulling out keys, I'm just pulling out the actual object number 1, object number 2. and object number 1 is a dictionary, student 01, for example. And then in student 01 is a dictionary. So instead of saying for D in devices, I have to say for D in S, because S is the dictionary, right? S is student 01 dictionary. So the key devices. And that's going to pull out the S1 device dictionary to loop through. So S devices, D, because it's the key of the devices, so that's going to be router 1, router 2, etc. And then the host name, I can just copy the rest of this here. That last. And then I can print IP, print the host name, and the host name changes. It is now S devices, D host name. And it's no longer a dictionary, it's a list of dictionaries. Let's see if that gives us the same thing. See, good error checking here in Python. Generally points right to the problem. I copied my error, so I have to fix it in 2 spots. Student 01 is not defined. Let's have a look here. In Python, because things go from the top to the bottom, you need to define your names before you use them. So I should put students below the place where I actually define student 01 and student 02. Okay, here we go. And you can see it knows there's a list. I can see the fact it's got a square bracket. It knows it's a list. Username, password. The devices dictionary is here. It's got all the right IP addresses in it. And then we start with the student number 2 dictionary here. And that's username, student 2, password, and then the same set of devices. Now I've got a data structure that's set up the right way. Now I want to write some code that's going to create an XML file. Let's take another look at the example. This is an example of the file I want to create. I'm going to write some code and start from the outside in. I'm going to be iterating through the data structure in a loop, starting with the student, then with the devices, and then with the devices parameters. But first, I'm going to start just with some code that builds the first tags in the file, the user mapping tag at the start and the close user mapping tag at the end. I'm using Python like it's a procedural programming language, but there's a lot of object-oriented terminology that we need to use and think about when we're using Python. So even though I'm really just focusing on a procedural way of approaching this, I'm not doing anything complicated. I still need to be aware that I'm working with objects. When I want to work with a file, I have to create an object that represents that file. So I'm going to create an object called user mapping, and it represents an open file called usermapping.xml, and I'm opening it in write mode. Now, since it's an object, it comes with its own built-in methods, and one of those is the write method. So I can use the object's write method to write a string to the file, and that string is going to be that very first tag with a new line at the end. I'm just going to have a pass statement in the middle to do nothing. That's going to be replaced by more code later. And then I'm going to close the file using the object's close method. Save the file, go back to the terminal window, and let's run it again. Run that program again. Okay, the program has run. Let's see if it actually created a file. There's my usermapping.xml file that's been created. And if I print it out, I can see that I've got those 2 tags. I'm writing to a text file in Python. Let's build the rest of the logic from the outside in. At this point, I have to create a for loop. And I'm going to be a bit more expressive here. Instead of S, I'll use for student in students. And eventually I'll go back and fix the rest of the program. I think that's a more descriptive variable name. And since student is a dictionary representing one student, for example, on the first pass through this data structure, it represents student 01. Here's student 01, whose username is student 01, password is this password, and its devices key points to the S1 device dictionary, which is nested further up here. There's the S1 device dictionary, which is a deep copy of the devices dictionary. So student and then the key name, username, will give me student 01 on the first pass through this loop, and student 02 on the second pass through this loop. Same thing for password. And I'm going to assign the devices dictionary that came along with this particular student to the variable lab. So lab is now the devices dictionary that goes along with student 01 on the first pass through this loop. Now I need to write a string, and this string is going to look like this: authorize, username, and then the value from the dictionary, password, and then another value from the dictionary. Later on, I'll end it with this close tag. And I need to escape this quotation mark because it's not part of the command, it's what I want to print. Put in the username variable, which will print the username string here that gets pulled out of the dictionary. And again, I'm going to escape this quotation mark. New line, and then end that whole string. At this point, I'll put in another pass statement, which just represents another place where I'm going to enter in another layer of the loop later on. And then I will write to the file the closing tag for the authorize block. I'll save that file and run it. We'll see what happens. I forgot my little colon here. Proper syntax for a for loop. Python gives me a syntax error on line 67, but it's really caused by the line above because I forgot to close it with a parentheses. And I also forgot to close this line with a parentheses. I get a key error here. There's no lab key. I must have misremembered what I called under the student directory, the key I'm using is devices. So I need to use that instead of lab. Okay, that ran. Let's see if it updated the file correctly. I see here my file now contains for 2 students, 2 authorized blocks. I want them to be indented, so I need to think of a way to indent these blocks and automatically come back to the normal level of indenting at the bottom of the file. The first indent is 4 spaces long, so I'm just going to create a string with 4 spaces in it. And it's going to come after the place where I wrote the initial user mapping tags, right here. So I'm going to put it here at the start of this loop. And wherever there's an indent, I'll just have it insert at the first of the line that needs to be indented. That should create 4 spaces at the start of that string. And I need to do the same thing on the closing tag. My authorized blocks have now been indented. Let's go back to our example file. The next level of block that I need to add is the actual device names or the connection names. So I need to start each one of those connection blocks with connection name, and then the name of the device from the lab, which I will get from the data structure that I created. As you can see in the data structure up here, my devices dictionary has the names of the devices in it: router 1, router 2, server 1, and server 2. So I can iterate through a copy of the devices dictionary and pull out the key names, and then use that to build this list of devices: router 1, router 2, server 1, and server 2 under one student, and then do the same thing under the other student. So to do that, I go back to my loop. I delete my pass statement and create another for loop, and this for loop iterates through the devices dictionary, which is currently represented by the lab variable in the parent for loop. So I can pull that in and then pull out the keys from the dictionary that's pointed to by the lab variable. And again, I put in a pass statement that's going to stand for more code later, and then close off this connection block for each device in the loop. And I need to add my indenting. I need to indent an extra level, so I'm going to take the original indent string and add I'm going to add 4 spaces to it. And then when we get out of this loop, we need to step back 1 level of indentation. So I'm going to remove 4 spaces from the end of the string. And I had to look this up how to do this, but the best way to do it looks like to use the string slicing feature in Python, and then you replace it with a copy of itself with the last 4 spaces stripped off. Saving that file and running this program again and seeing what happens. I'm terrible at this. I get a syntax error every time I run it. And again, while it looks like the error is on line 75, the problem is 1 level up. So if you get a syntax error and you can't figure out what's wrong with the line it's pointing to, look 1 line up and you can see that I did not close this parentheses. Let's try that again. That seems to have run okay. The only error I did here was I calculated what my indents should be, but I did not put them in the actual strings to be printed. So I just need to add indent into each string. And that looks like what I expect. I see that it has iterated through the devices dictionary, or the copy of the devices dictionary that's under each student, and given me the keys from that dictionary and inserted them as a string into another string that contains the text connection name for each block. Again, let's look at our example file. Now I need to fill in the parameters for each connection, and that is this block here that goes between the 2 connection tags. And those parameters are stored in the parameters SSH params dictionary, which was copied multiple times through the rest of this data structure. So that consists of a set of key value pairs, the protocol, the host name, port, username, and password of the device. I'm going to put in another loop to iterate through this dictionary. I will replace the pass statement with this new code. First, I need to define the dictionary I'm going to be working through. I'm going to call it parameters. Every time this loop runs, there'll be a new dictionary assigned to the parameters variable. That parameters dictionary is, according to this loop, it's in the lab dictionary and it's pointed to by the device. So in the lab dictionary, I have a set of devices, the routers, the servers, and every device has a set of parameters. So if I index based on lab device, and that device key will be router 1, router 2, etc. And I'm going to make sure I indent this time. And now I'm going to enter in my for loop. For each key in the parameters dictionary, or into the copy of the dictionary pointed to by the parameters variable, I'm going to write a string that I create with the various variables plugged into it into the file. Actually, just to be careful, I'm just going to copy and paste that right from my example file. Param name equals, escape the quote mark, put in the variable. Here I put in a value that is the value in the dictionary pointed to by the key. So I have to reference the parameters dictionary, and the key is the name of the parameter. And at the end of that line is that closing tag for the parameter with a new line. And then we back out one level in the script, and we back out one level in the indenting. And I think I indented all of my code here one step too far, so I'm just going to back that out. I will save this file and run it. As usual, I get a syntax error, and as usual, it's because I forgot to close the parenthesis. There, it looks like everything's working correctly. My usermapping.xml file is now populated, and because I used loops that go through the data structure and pull out the key names and used those for the parameter names, I can have a parameter list of any length. There are many other parameters I could add to this file. And it's the same thing for the students. I could have a student list that's 2 students long or 20 students long. It wouldn't matter. This script will still print out the XML file in this same format. I can do more after this. I should clean this up. I should start breaking this down into functions and modules so it's easier to maintain. And I should also change the way that I get the data into the program. Instead of having it hard-coded in the actual program itself, I should create something like a process for reading from a configuration file or something like that. That's for another day. I think I've done enough for today. Thank you very much for listening.